Not a pie chart channel, by the way, but we're going to be taking a look at the V-BT03 meta-analysis. Please do not call me a Simo ripoff, thank you. But I will not deny that this is kind of, taking inspiration from that. So, today I want to talk about what's legit right around the corner. At least I'm hoping to get this video out before it is on the corner, if that makes sense. But we're going to be talking about the V-BT03 meta going in, because this is going to be really important for people to have their Spring Fests throughout the next 2 months or so, because for us in Europe, our Spring Fests only start in May, which is going to be post V-BT04 meta, so I'm going to have a separate video looking at that. But this is going to be important for those of you in the US and in Asia, because I'm pretty sure you have your Spring Fests still in this format, so that's pretty important to talk about. But V-BT03, in my opinion, is I think it's the best set in the V-Series so far. It has by far the nicest quality of support, because it not only opens up different build paths for a lot of decks, it opens up a lot of variety for budget decks as well. And overall, the support that it gave to the clans, it didn't make it so that the clans in this set became the best and there's nothing better than them. It made it so that the clans in this set are as good as everything else. It made Royals as good as everything else. It brought up OTT back up to the standard of everything else in Standard. And then it also pushed Narukami, which is my biggest surprise. Narukami going from a brand new clan to one of the best picks for the decks in this format. And then sadly Nobutamma doesn't perform as well, but maybe there's, that can change in the English format. We're going to be taking a look at the results from the Japanese format over the months that they had this format. But before we get into this, before we even talk about this, also I didn't even mention Azel, but you already know that deck's good. But before we get into this, I want to give a huge, absolutely ginormous galaxy-sized shout out to Dexander, who on Twitter, he's been posting these pie charts on his account from his blog, which is just dexander.wordpress.com. So he's the one that provided these pie charts. I got in touch with him as well. I asked if it's okay for me to use these pie charts for the video, but do check him out on Twitter. I'm going to leave a link in the description. Do check out his blog. He does posts about the meta. He is really collecting all the tournament results. So I see people asking, where do I see all the tournament results for the English and Japanese format and all the different formats? There. You go there. He's summarizing everything right now, and he's just putting all of that stuff in there. He has all the big tournaments. He even shows how many players or teams are in each event. He's only taking the big events into consideration of these results as well. And he's posting as many of the deck lists as possible, as many of the results as possible. So really, check him out. Really, check out his blog, because it has all the good stuff. He even makes separate posts on stuff like Azel and like Garmor and stuff like that. Just different deck build ideas as well. So if you want to get some inspiration, if you want to see how the meta is evolving, you can check out his blog. Seriously, do yourself a favor. Follow him on Twitter. I really, really cannot recommend it enough. But we're going to be using the pie chart that he created to talk about the meta. We're going to be doing the same for V-BT04, and if he keeps doing it, then I would love to keep using them in the future as well, because this is a really great video format for me as well, because I don't really like all my other ways of talking about the competitive format, but this way it's kind of, again, please don't call me a Simo ripoff, but I really like his approach, and I feel like that approach is the best in discussing these kind of things as well. So getting into it, here you're going to see the pie chart. Maybe I should move a bit to the side. So what is happening in this format? So this is a compilation from December 15th to January 25th, which is when V-BT04 released. So that's all the months of this format. So we have the following events: the 193 VGCS of 32 teams, Cosmo VGCS of 33 teams, East Japan Vanguard Cup 39 teams, WGP Malaysia 378 players, WGP Korea without players listed, the Toshigi VGCS 31 teams, Hakata VGCS, then Chidose VGCS with 16 teams. So that's the lowest, but even 16 teams is still like what, 48 players, right? Which is, still fine for like a regional, well, for a VGCS level event. Second, Mia VGCS, 36 teams. Oita Vanguard Championship, 22 players. Sadly the lowest, so only the first place is listed there. WGP 2018 Finals of Japan, obviously the biggest deal. And then finally the World Championship WGP Finals in Japan as well, which is the biggest result we can possibly get. So this is the pie chart that is the result of all of those events. So now taking a look at it, he also breaks it down in terms of percentage as well as all the clans featured. So surprisingly, in first place, the best clan in this format is Angel Feather. So Angels have been adapting a little bit. They've put in that grade 3 common that lets you retire itself and call any card from your damage zone as a guardian, meaning you can call the perfect guards from your damage zone and PG with them without actually committing from your hand. Well, you do have to commit the grade 3, but if you called it from anywhere else, then it's not actually commitment from hand, which is quite nice. So, Angel Feathers have been doing well. They also have the promo that we're receiving for the Spring Fest that kind of does like a rescue check, which is also really nice. So, some nice additions, but Angels are just showing that the card quality in VEB03 was also insane for all 3 clans, because we can see all 3 clans in here showing up with a lot of representation, so that's really nice to see. But Angel Feathers are really showing up the most. Even though they haven't been supported for 2 sets, we've had 2 sets of support for like, what, 8 different clans? And, you know, it's still 24%, basically a quarter of the meta consists of Angel Feather in Japan. From not just Japan, Malaysia, Korea, and all of Asia basically, the entire Japanese format, so Japanese language format, let's say. So Angel Feather showing up the most is definitely nice to see, because it shows that if you invested in that clan back in December in English, it's gonna stay good until like March at least, and it's still, even then, it's still gonna be topping. So Angel Feather is just a ridiculously good clan. It's showing up the most in terms of representation, and I think like just because of how good their card quality is, you know, with Zerakiel and Metatron and Armaiti and all those cards, and the fact they can call from drop zone, and their win con is so easy to achieve, and they can play around a lot of different situations, whether it's damage starving or anything. It's just a really good clan. It's super good, and I'm not surprised that it's doing so well. In second place, however, that's super close actually in terms of representation, with 22% is Royals, which is also pretty amazing to see. Now, Royals got a massive buff throughout this last set as well, because V-BT03 gave them a lot of good cards. It gave them the Monarch Sanctuary Alfred, which is huge because it lets you recycle your Blaster Blades. Also, if you had to like guard with them, or they got in like retired, or you had to intercept with them or whatever, you can recycle them to put them in the soul for Exculpate later, which is really important. And then it also gets this nice continuous skill that gives your Blaster Blades power continuously, also in your opponent's turn, for the shield power on top of that as well. So Monarch is just a really solid grade 3, and it just gave a lot of extra boost for Royals in this set. It gave us a really nice variant of deck building, where it's also nice that it doesn't require the King of Knights Alfred. You can play the deck with the Alfred early as well, which is really important, and for me that's the preferred point, because now I finally started playing Royals because of that. But so Monarch Sanctuary Alfred is a really huge addition. I think the 2 best additions to the clan though are K and Bedivere. Bedivere as a card itself is really nice because he lets you call K from hand to +1 by drawing 1, and then that's a free cost, so you don't have to actually pay anything. You don't have to like counterblast 1 or anything. K on the other hand lets you deck search for Bedivere, which is also huge because you can actually also call it out when you're on grade 1, and also this makes the Blaster Blade Rush much easier to do, because you can call down a Bedivere, call down a K, draw 1, and then you can call down, I don't know, like an Allen or basically whatever else that Superior calls to get the Blaster Blade crit, and then push them for a crit early with a bunch of attacks. Sure, that's a pretty big commitment, but in the end it's going to be like a 2-card commitment from your hand in order to actually do that now. So K and Bedivere are a really huge addition. They also have hit for nice numbers. They're just really quality cards that the deck really needed, and so them entering the card pool for Royal Paladin in Standard gave them this massive push, honestly. Like 22% is huge, and them doing so well plus having the Exculpate win con is absolutely insane. So I think Exculpate is still a really important part of the deck. We've seen the deck build from China that's been running with 4 Exculpates and like the Alfred early and 4 Monarchs, which I think is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to build the deck right now. But I think even the more like standard builds with King and Knights with Monarch and like 2 or 3 Exculpates is still really good, but Exculpate is a big win con. You can also do it several times, and a lot of clients cannot put up with it. It wins Zanbaku as a matchup in my opinion as well, because Zanbaku spams its field and you can just like rush it out by just killing everything with Exculpate. You have a really good matchup, and having force numbers on top of that is also really good. So Royals coming in second in terms of most representation doesn't surprise me either. In third, we have OTT. So OTT made a big comeback. They haven't been doing so hot ever since V-BT02 released, so for quite a while now actually. They've been kind of struggling because Zanbaku does kind of destroy them really hard. So OTT got a big boost. one in the trial deck with the grade 2 Magus that allows you to stack your deck pretty early, which is also super nice. You also have the grade 1 Magus from the booster set that stacks your crits. There's also some nice comments in the set, but the best thing is that you don't have to change the build much and you don't have to invest much. You buy a trial deck, you buy a few commons, and you've got the deck updated. So if you invested in Imperial Daughters and CEOs early in V-BT01, those cards are still seeing play. They're going to see play for at least a year, and that makes it really nice because you paid, whatever you paid for Imperial Daughters, you're basically paying for like a 1-year subscription to a really good card, if you follow that kind of logic. But OTT doing so well really shows that just that little boost that it got from the last set is doing really well. Sadly, the Magus engine, the Magus deck itself isn't doing so hot. It's mostly just Imperial Daughter still carrying the clan really hard together with the new cards as well. So it's nice to see that 18% is really huge as well. It's almost a fifth of the entire representation, so that little extra tiny boost it got from the trial deck plus the booster set shows that OTT, like, that's all it really needed to compete against all the other clans in this format. And the fact that Murakumo is basically nowhere to be seen, well, it's on that chart, but it's really kind of dying down until V-BT04 shows that now OTT can take its spot and show up quite well for these upcoming few months. In fourth place with 12% is personally my favorite deck of the format, which is Narukami. Narukami is doing amazingly. All they got was a trial deck and a set, and they're able to compete with the top decks in the format. It has insane matchups against everything. I think it has a good royal matchup because if you bind their Blaster Blades, that's kind of cucking them out of their Exculpate unless they rode one. And then it's got good matchups against a lot of different stuff. Good matchup against OTT because you can bind the Promised Daughter. Good matchup against Angel Feather because if they commit to a Feather Palace too early and you bind it, they can't salvage it back from the drop zone with the Celestial Grade 2, which is really, really important. And so Narukami has really solid card pool. Almost all the good cards bind something or profit off of binding something. You have cards that swap rows, so that way you can really just get rid of everything. And you have a lot of cards that just works super well. It has a great Murakumo matchup as well because you can just, like, if they commit too much to the front row, you just go into a Vermilion if you run it, or you just bind everything one by one. And that's really good as well. And then on top of that, I think it has a really solid matchup against Great Nature as well, which showed up really hot at World, and it's doing super well now as well. And while it's not going to be a very popular deck in the Japanese format, as you know, we can see from this pie chart, but it's still showing up and it as the next clan that we're going to talk about. But Great Nature is definitely a good matchup for Narukami in my opinion as well, because it's an Axel clan that, like, sure, well, I think Great Nature is still the best Axel clan. Narukami has a lot of outs to it, and if they commit to a big front row, then they can go into a Vermilion and just pop everything and just use that momentum to come back into the game. So I think Narukami is super solid with just one trial deck of support and one clan of support, one main booster set of support. It's looking super hot, and I'm really happy that it's doing so well, and it's still getting more support later this year, so it's only going to get better. With 7% up next, we have Great Nature. Now, Great Nature is also doing amazing. We've seen it Worlds. I already made a whole video talking about this. You can check that out. I'm not going to waste too much time, but Great Nature has an insane card quality. It's one of the best Axel decks in general. It can win a lot of matchups. It can win against Angels. It has a really good matchup against Angels, and we'll see how it can adapt to stuff like OTT at the moment, because being an Axel clan, it should naturally have a good matchup, but then we'll see how it's going to actually pace out. But Great Nature already did a whole video talking about why it's so good, so you can check that out if you want to, but it being at 7% of the total representation is not a surprise, even though the deck is really unpopular in Japan. Then we have Neo Nectar, still showing up super well. Neo Nectar, I think, is still going to be around to stay, even in V-BT04 format, because in V-BT04, the clan we're going to be seeing the most, actually, well, one of the most, is going to be Shadows, and Shadows have a terrible matchup, in my opinion, against Neo Nectar, because some decks run like 12 grade 1s with 5k power, meaning that Neo Nectar can just poop out tokens and just drop a bunch of 5k tokens on the board and rush in on the Shadow Paladin opponent, and then they don't have enough time to come back from that because they got rushed by the opponent committing no cards by just calling a bunch of tokens, you know? So that's really, really huge in my opinion. Going first with Neo Nectar is absolutely huge. It's still one of the better Force clans, even though now, looking at this, we can see that Royals is the best Force clan. In terms of representation, Neo Nectar does have the second spot, and that's really amazing to see, and I think it's going to be like that for quite some time. Even when Shadows come out, we'll see if they can keep up with Bermudas in terms of how good Force clans can be. because Neo Nectar won't get support for a while. After that, we're going to see a lot of Kagura support, DP support, Royal Paladin support again, so Force clans are going to keep getting support while Neo Nectar won't, but for the time being, Neo Nectar is going to be looking really hot because it's got free advantage everywhere. It can convert that free advantage into even better free advantage, and it's just super nice for that reason, and it can push out games super easily, and it's just a super good clan in general. You can check out my deck preview if you haven't, because I kind of went over the whole clan over there. Golds to me are a surprise here, because only 4% of the general representation was golds, which in my opinion should be the best Axel deck, honestly. I said Narukami has the spot for best Axel deck, but even though it only has 4% representation here, I think golds have the most, like in a best of one scenario, they should have the highest win rate, just because they have two ways now to achieve their win con of going into Azel and then going into the Raven-haired Azel after that, and just kind of rolling over the opponent on grade 1 with a bunch of Axel circles and big numbers and a crit and guard restrictions and everything, because Raven-haired Azel can do that. And Wonder Azel can help you so much more. And the fact that Raven-haired Azel works with being superior called from deck and then still superior calling something is really huge. So that's something that Vivian can't do for you, but it's still, like, I'm surprised it's only 4% here, but I think because this only takes the English, this only takes the Japanese format in consideration, when this pie chart changes, which it will, with the English format, I think we're going to see some big changes to how this is going to play out, because I think Gold Paladins will go up in terms of this, but golds only being 4% is a surprise to me. I think this clan is really good, so if you've invested in golds and you're playing golds, whether it's in standard or especially in premium, let's not talk about that, but even in standard it's going to be super good, and it's a very solid pick in my opinion for Team League as well. Genesis is interesting because Genesis saw a lot of representation at Worlds. Well, not representation, but it did really well at Worlds. It got top 8 as well. Genesis is difficult to play in my opinion, but if you can master it, it is super redeeming. And so it has a lot of different ways to adapt to different matchups, and it being a good Force clan shows that this is now, what, the third best Force clan in the meta. So I think if you did invest in Genesis, it's still really good. Himiko is a great card. You have Melissa as a win con. There's decks that really go through, like against Angels you have a good matchup because they go through the deck super fast. So if you Melissa them twice, they're probably going to deck out. Against Royals, I'm not too sure. They don't thin their deck that much. OTT maybe, but against some of the other decks that we've been through so far, you don't have the Melissa win con as much, but you can still manipulate the damage and how you apply pressure with Himiko pretty easily, and the deck does reward skillful play a lot. So I think it's still a solid pick, and this pie chart does show that as well. Gear Chronicle to me is a surprise. It has just as much representation as Genesis and Murakumo, but Gear Chronicle, I know that it's topped and I've seen the list. It's like one card difference from the list I made as well. Gear Chronicle is really good, but I think it's not like objectively really good. It's really fun, but it's a bit of a high roll deck, and I think it kind of depends how lucky you are with drawing into your stuff and binding it, how fast you can set up your bind zone, how fast you can play around your own hand really and draw into everything to make sure you have the pieces to get the Mystery Flare off and all of that stuff. So Gear Chronicle has an interesting card pool. I don't know if it's going to stay this way and it's going to keep topping, but I think it's nice that this gives hope, but I think it's still part of the rogue decks. I think now we're kind of getting into the rogue decks of the format, and Gear Chronicle and Genesis together are kind of in that same criteria for me. So Gear Chronicle is good, but I think you need to be really good with it and really careful with it in order to do well at a big event. Finally, Murakumo. Murakumo is currently looking pretty bad, but it's going to be the best deck in format for V-BT04 because Shirayuki gives it insane support, but for now Murakumo is getting a little bit dormant just because a lot of decks can play around it. Now, Narukami has a good way to play around it. Great Nature outplays it just because it does more. It's a better Axel clan. You know, OTT is not having as many problems against it anymore. Although a thing is still having problems, but because people are playing it less and it's doing not as well, people play OTT. So it's kind of just like shifting because Murakumo isn't that popular anymore. And then Royals have a pretty alright matchup against the two, and also Exculpate just destroys them in terms of card advantage as well. So if you can play around their counterblast and just Exculpate them, then you're going to be doing really, really well. And then on top of that, you know, Angel Feather have never had a bad matchup against it. You know, they have Zerakill to come out of the Zambaku, and then otherwise they have to go into the Mandala Lord and pressure you with a bunch of attacks, you know, which does work, but it's still a fringe scenario, which you don't play around too much. So I think that's why Murakumo is decreasing in popularity, and it's kind of not doing as hot, but I think it's still going to be a solid pick if you know what you're doing. Finally, Kagura. For now, it's still waterfall.deck. Kagura still does well. You know, Kagura won my local last 2 weeks ago, I think, you know, which is like, Kagura is still really nice, but it's just because it has an insane win con with Waterfall, but people know how to play against Waterfall. And there's a lot of decks that can play against Waterfall. Angel Feather can play against Waterfall, you know, Great Nature is good at playing against Waterfall. I think the other clans, like OTT especially, is easy for it to play against Waterfall. So a lot of clans now can play against Waterfall, you know, and in terms of removal, Narukami does it better because, you know, against Kagura, like stuff like Angels can bring back from the drop zone, it doesn't even mind. Same with like Royals, they can bring back their Blaster Blades, so it doesn't even mind being retired. So Narukami in terms of like removal is definitely the better clan here, so Kagura only at 1%, definitely in the rogue tier for now, but it's gonna get better with the upcoming double wave of support that is getting pretty soon. So this was my meta-analysis for V-BT03. This was pretty long actually. Damn, we're breaking the 20-minute mark, so I'm gonna try to close it out here, but this is the general overview for the V-BT03 meta. So if you have your Springfest coming up now, these are the decks you really need to consider as we're going to be seeing a lot and what's worth playtesting against the most. So keep this pie chart in consideration. Do check out Dexander's website as well as Twitter blog for any updates to the pie chart as the English meta starts rolling out the big event results, because that's going to be really interesting to see how the English results will affect this pie chart, whether Angels will remain the best deck or whether Royals or OTT or Narukami can take it over, and whether Gold Paladin will just go up tremendously in terms of representation as well. So we'll see how that paces out, but this is just a really interesting look into the format, and I really like doing this kind of approach to looking at the format as well, so I hope you guys enjoyed it as well, because to me, this is really interesting to see. This is like one of the healthiest metas we've had. Like, if I count just the meta decks, there's at least 8 of them, like 7 or 8, and then at least 4 to 5 good rogue picks. So I think like Shadow Paladin, for example, isn't on this, but I think Shadows also have still good matchups against a lot of the decks. They just struggle until Gust Blaster is out, so it's not as good as it potentially could be, but it's still a super good meta in my opinion for the game and for the game's health in general. So it's just looking super nice to see this kind of healthy meta, and so I hope that we can have the same thing in English, which I'm pretty sure we will, but we'll see what kind of results we get that will affect this pie chart as well. So I'll be doing this again for V-BT04, so do look forward to that. It'll be again close to like the release week. I might do like a, I don't know, post-English meta, but I guess there's no point to look at this because the interesting part of this pie chart is that the V-BT03 meta in Japan concluded. It's already done, you know, because they move on to V-BT04, so that's why we can actually look at this. Whereas in English, when V-BT03 meta is finished, there's no point to look at it anymore. So that's why I wanted to look at it now, so that when you're going into your Springfest over the next couple of months, you know what you're going to be looking out for in terms of the decks that you're going to be playing against. So that's going to be it for me today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to check out all the stuff in the description and click that sweet bell button. I do appreciate it a lot. But on that note, that's going to be it for me today. Huge shoutouts once again to Dexander for providing this pie chart and letting me use it. But on that note, I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.